What's up guys? Today I'm installing a Bilstein / Dobinson's lift to my stock 2025 Tundra. I have had this same setup on two previous Tacomas and it was awesome. Specifically, I will be installing the Bilstein 6112 coilovers, the Bilstein B8 6100s in the rear, and Dobinson's rear coil springs with a progressive design geared towards an extra 100-pound load. The goal is to level the truck and add some off-road capability. Stick around. Start by breaking your lug nuts and chocking the rear tires. Then lift the entire front end and place your jacks on the outer frame behind the tires. Remove the lug nuts and tires from the vehicle. Next, to remove the sway bar, you're first going to remove the 17mm bolt on the sway bar lower control arm linkage and the 4 bolts on the frame. This will loosen the sway bar so that it's resting on the cheap Tundra skid plate. You could also choose to remove the skid plate, but for me it wasn't necessary. Use a breaker bar to loosen but not remove the lower control arm bolts. Use a jack to support the lower control arm and use a 24mm socket to remove the 2 steering knuckle bolts. Once your knuckle bolts are loose, you're going to want to loosen the 13mm bolts on the top hat and slowly lower your jack so that way you can remove the 19mm lower strut bolt, lowering the lower control arm all the way until you can start to work the coil over out through the bottom. This can be a bit of a bear with one person. I suggest using 2. However, I was able to work it through by maneuvering the lower control arm and pulling it out through the bottom. The new strut assembly is quite a bit heavier, but you're going to feed it through the exact same way you pulled the stock strut out. You're going to want to put the lower strut bolt in first, put it in hand tight, and use your jack to slowly push the lower control arm up and guide the top hat bolts through the holes that are there. Use the emblem on the top hat labeled as out to make sure that the coilover is aligned correctly. Now you're going to want to tighten the top hat bolts to 33 foot-pounds. Do this in a star pattern to ensure that it is tightened evenly. Once you have aligned your bottom strut into the strut bracket, go ahead and torque down your lower strut bolt to 122 foot-pounds. Maneuver your steering knuckle to the upper control arm and fasten the 2 knuckle bolts to 192 foot-pounds. You want your strut assembly to be nice and snug, so go ahead and use vice grips to latch onto the top pin of your strut and a 21mm box end wrench to go ahead and tighten that down to 48 foot-pounds. Connect the sway bar at the lower control arm before lowering the vehicle down onto its tires and tightening the sway bar to the frame. Now torque down all the bolts one more time just to ensure that everything is to spec. Now that the front is done, go ahead and lower it and let's move on to the rear. To start the rear, I used the floor jack to go ahead and lift up from the frame so I could place two jacks on the frame in front of both rear tires, ensuring that the axle had plenty of droop, allowing me to fit in the new coil springs and struts. Remove all of the 12mm bolts holding the brake lines to ensure that none of them snap during the lowering of the axle. Then go ahead and remove the 17mm linkage bolt. Once the jack stands were in place, I repositioned the floor jack to the axle so that way I could support it while removing the struts and springs. Remove the lower strut bolt, then use the floor jack to lower the axle. Once you have done that, you can remove the top strut bolt and pull the old strut out. While the axle is lowered, go ahead and pull out your old spring and fit in the new spring. You may need to use a spring compressor to get it to fit. Make sure that you replace the rubber sound deafening sleeves. It is important that the spring is installed the exact same way that the old spring came out, so it may be a good idea to take a picture of the old spring before you remove it. Fasten the lower strut bolt and use your floor jack to slowly push the strut stem into its hole. Reference the manufacturer instructions to ensure you install the bushings correctly. Once the strut stem is through the hole, you can go ahead and tighten the nut to 48 foot-pounds. It will be necessary to use your vice grips and a 21mm box end wrench to get it nice and snug. Once this is done, go ahead and make sure all of your bolts that you disassembled are torqued down to their specified torque specs. Slap your tires back on and lower your rear end back down to the ground. Inspect the springs and struts as you lower the vehicle to the ground. Take your truck for a test drive and check over the entire vehicle one more time. Alright, so there you have it. The front and the rear are both done. One thing to note is that the Bilstein 6112s use a circlip design. Shock Surplus pre-assembled the 6112s on the 5/6 circlip setting. This gave the front end of my truck a standard of 1.9 inch lift. The Dobinson rear springs gave the truck an extra 1.5 inch lift in the rear. Here are the exact measurements that I achieved with this lift. In the future, I may raise the 6112s to the 7/8 circlip to achieve a better level. However, I think it looks really good, and if I ever decide to put an aftermarket bumper on the rear, it may take up some of that spring load. I attached some Bilstein 6112 circlip specs and some Toyota torque specs that will hopefully help you guys along the way. Appreciate you guys watching, and just as a disclaimer, I am not a certified mechanic. I am a weekend warrior, just doing my best. So if you guys have any tips, that would be much appreciated.